evening, everybody, and a happy Pride from us here at Busboys and Poets Books. We know that Pride is year-round, but we're always real excited when the actual month comes around and we get to celebrate. Today, we have a real exciting book for you guys. In case you are as nerdy as me, you might have seen this featured on Code Switch, an NPR talk show based around race, pop culture, and all things under that umbrella, which is everything. And we're real excited to be hosting this wonderful, wonderful author. So today we are hosting Daniel Olivares for Chicano Frankenstein. In Chicano Frankenstein, we see a twist on Mary Shelley's traditional Frankenstein tale, the thing that started what we love to call sci-fi, fantasy, and horror. Today, we have an unnamed paralegal brought back to life through a controversial process, maneuvers through a near-future world that both needs and resents him. Sounds a little familiar. As the U.S. president spouts anti-reanimation rhetoric and giant pharmaceutical companies rake in profits, the man falls in love with lawyer Faustina Godínez. His world expands as he meets her network of family and friends, setting him on a course to discover his first life history, which the reanimation process actually erases. With elements of sci-fi, horror, political satire, and romance, Chicano Frankenstein, it confronts our nation's bigotries and the question of what it truly means to be human. Tonight, we are joined by Daniel A. Olivas, the grandson of Mexican immigrants, who was born and raised near downtown Los Angeles. Give it up for those California folks. I know those of you at home are like, yeah. He is an award-winning author of fiction, nonfiction, plays, and poetry, including My Chicano Heart, How to Date a Flying Mexican, and Things We Do Not Talk About. Widely anthologized, he has written on culture and literature for the New York Times, LA Review of Books, the Los Angeles Times, Alta Journal, Jewish Journal, Zocalo, and The Guardian. He writes regularly for La Bloga, a site dedicated to Latinx literature and the arts. He received his degree in English Lit from Stanford University and law degree from UCLA. So he actually also understands what he's writing about here, which is always a plus for authors. By day, Olivas is an attorney and makes his home in South California with his wife and law school sweetheart, Susan Formaker, who is an administrative law judge. So you're getting a little bit of the fantasy and the realism here. Joining him tonight is Laura Stanfill. She is the publisher of Forest Avenue Press and the author of Singing Lessons from the Stylish Canary, which came out from Lanternfish Press in 2022. I'm going to stop yapping now, and I'm going to bring folks on stage. Welcome, y'all.
Thank you. Thank you. What a lovely, lovely introduction. And hi, Laura. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, Daniel. I'm so happy to be here tonight.
Well, this is delightful. And, Busboys and Poets is just such an institution. And I'm especially lucky to be here today with my publisher, the brilliant, hardworking Laura Stanfill, and who is going to be asking me a bunch of questions, right?
Absolutely. I'm really excited. But before we get to that moment, how about you read a little excerpt from Chicano Frankenstein for us?
Sure. Let me pull up a page. This little section from the novel follows my main character, who is unnamed. He's only called the man throughout the novel. He wakes up from a recurring nightmare. The man sat up. He breathed heavily, and a cold sheen of perspiration covered his body. The man looked upon Faustina, sleeping on her side, facing him, curled into a ball like a cat, and snoring, face half buried in the man's pillow. The sheet had fallen to the floor, and the soft amber light of the corner lamp bathed Faustina's body in a gentle glow. The man softly touched Faustina's skin at her left shoulder and then at her hip, perfectly joined, not a line of rippled scar tissue, simply beautiful brown skin running seamlessly along the contours of her limbs. His breathing slowed as he calmed from the delirium of the nightmare. The man sighed, stood, and walked into the bathroom. He closed the door and turned on the light. He looked in the mirror and considered the differences between Faustina's body and his own. The man slowly ran his fingers across the scar tissue where his left hip and leg joined. A fairly good match of skin color and even in foot size. His own right foot takes a size 9 medium shoe, but the man could comfortably walk about wearing a 9.5, the size of the foot on his new leg. The man then ran his fingers along the scars where his left arm had been joined at the shoulder. His own right arm and shoulder were, of course, perfect together, but the jarring line of color looked like a children's wooden jigsaw puzzle of the United States, with each state a different color from its neighbor. Couldn't they have found skin that was closer in hue? The brown of his left shoulder stood out against the white of the arm, and his left hand was so much larger than his right. A shocking mismatch. Why? Was it some kind of cruel joke? Did the surgeons and nurses laugh and offer sniggering jibes about the man's patchwork body parts? How could anyone be so cruel as to deny him the modest gift of conformity, that inner peace that springs from ordinariness, an opportunity to simply be only himself and not contain many? He didn't seem to belong anywhere, neither here nor there. Thank you.
That was beautiful, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Before we start in on the questions, if you want to share a little bit about this piece that you shared and tell us about the man and just a basic overview.
Sure. So in my novel, which is of course inspired by the great Mary Shelley, Frankenstein, or the modern Prometheus, in my novel, the man remains nameless in the same way that the creature or monster in the Mary Shelley novel remains nameless. Only the Dr. Frankenstein, gets the honor of having his name on the cover of her book. And in my novel, which takes place in the near future, primarily in the city of Pasadena, where we live now, the country has perfected reanimation. There are 12 million reanimated people. People can sign a donor card and agree to be reanimated if they're suddenly killed. And in the reanimation process, people's histories and memories of their personal lives are wiped. People basically go back into the workforce, typically in the jobs that they held before, because the country is suffering from a declining birth rate. The reanimated have their faces changed and their fingerprints removed, and DNA companies are prohibited from accepting any of their DNA samples so that they can never reconnect with their former lives, with their former family members. They basically have to begin anew. Many ways, almost like infants, except they have their basic skills in terms of how to live life, how to pay rent, how to feed themselves, how to dress, and how to go to work. All the while, there is a political movement within the country headed by a right-wing president named Mary Beth Cadwallader, and she is trying to juice her midterm election numbers. It's her last term, and she wants to make certain she has a House and Senate to keep her legacy alive. And she is pushing a political mantra of "Make America Safe Again," or MASA. And so the novel plays on two different terrains. It's very personal as a man lives his life and eventually falls in love and tries to search for his Dr. Frankenstein, and the political side, which is played out with news interviews like with Anderson Cooper, and political shows, and inner White House transcripts. So that's basically the novel.
Excellent. Thank you. So we've talked about this a lot. As a publisher, I call what I like to publish at Forest Avenue literary fiction. But as you just said, Daniel, your book is political, and you read a very romantic scene at the beginning of our chat here today. And I'm curious, what genre do you think your book is?
So I struggle with the concept of genre because, frankly, I write whatever I want to write. I've been called a magical realist. I've been called a social realist. I have written horror. I've written science fiction. I've written scenes and stories which I would consider rather romantic. And there's certainly I think, a beautiful romance within, a couple romances actually within the novel. So I'm not certain I would classify this novel as horror or science fiction, because in many ways it also is political satire. Um, it also is literary fiction, I think. Um, when we study Frankenstein by Mary Shelley in school, it's not typically in a class about science fiction or horror, or at least not typically. I think her book is typically taught in just general literature courses. So I feel bad for marketers who have to figure out what hook to use. But I do have to say that because of the horror element to the novel, I have gotten to know, primarily on social media, horror novelists and short story writers, and it is a very powerful and beautiful community. I am delighted by the StokerCon tweets that I'm reading right now, because that conference has been going on. So if someone wants to call me a horror writer now, when I wasn't before, that it's a beauty.
Why do you think Mary Shelley's classic is still so popular and still being taught? And how did you come up with writing a modern day version?
Well, her novel, it's a good question, because her novel is iconic. It is probably, it's been called one of the first, or one of the truly seminal science fiction novels. And I think the beauty of her novel is that she is able to create a character in the creature who in fact murders, goes on a murdering spree, but who is also extremely sympathetic. To be able to create that kind of character is truly remarkable. And she was so young when she wrote it. When it was published in 1818, I don't think she was even 20 years old, and she had written the first draft a couple years before, and as a teenager. So I mean, she came from brilliant pedigree. Her mother was, of course, one of the early great feminist philosophers, and her father was a philosopher, and she grew up in a world of ideas and books. In terms of how I came up with the idea, in 2022, I was struggling yet again with the anti-immigrant rhetoric of that political year, of that midterm year. And I had addressed issues regarding bigotry and anti-immigrant sentiment in fiction before, and also in the play Waiting for Godínez. But I decided to write a novel that would capture the horrific hatred that I was witnessing yet again. And so the most iconic horror novel that I could think of was Frankenstein. And so I reread the novel. I rewatched the movies. There are various wonderful movies, including the classic 1931 version, directed by James Whale and produced by Universal Pictures, where the vision of the creature that we all imagine was created in that movie, with the flat head and the heavy eye makeup. Boris Karloff was brilliant in that movie. So I immersed myself in both the text and then the movies, and then I came upon the idea to treat the creature as a metaphor for immigrants and other folks within the country who are needed to keep the country moving and functioning and growing, but who are at the same time resented, hated, and treated as the other.
I didn't know what your process was in writing the book when it came into my inbox during submission time. I just knew that there was something special here. I flagged it. I've never told you this, but my committee actually flagged it in our submissions inbox as a manuscript of potential importance. And when we circled back and moved through the pile of submissions and really started focusing on Chicano Frankenstein, it became clear that this is a book that is timely and resonant and necessary and great fun to read also. Despite all the serious topics, it's a really interesting, compelling read. And so after we signed the contract and got moving in publishing, I found out that you had written it at a remarkable pace. Can you talk about that, please?
Yes, I wrote it in 50 days, and that's
unbelievable, Daniel.
Now, of course, as you know, as my publisher, once it was accepted, I put it through edits and added a couple short chapters as we discussed, tweaking it and shaping it. But basically, it was within 50 days, and I wrote in the morning. I wrote after dinner. I wrote on weekends, and I wrote. There was a Thanksgiving holiday during that period, and I think most people know, and certainly writers know, that the writing doesn't just occur when you're typing. The writing occurs in all the time you think about and ponder what you want to create. And so there were actually many months before, probably the beginning of that 2022, when the political rhetoric just, really started, is when I was beginning to work through the concept, the idea, how it would be structured, and then when I started writing, it just came. The structure came. It seemed very natural for me to play it on two different planes, a very personal and a very worldly and political. I'm primarily a short story writer, and in some ways, I think being a short story writer kind of got me ready to write this. In some ways, I treated each chapter like almost like an enclosed piece, separate piece. And then one of the things that I did, which I don't have to do when I write a short story, was I tracked each chapter on a separate document. So I had a summary of each chapter as I wrote it. After I wrote the chapter, and I then wrote a summary, so that when I was done, I was able to kind of map it out. And as you know, during the editing process, I realized at one point there was a continuity issue I had to deal with, and I needed to move a couple things around. But by creating these little capsule descriptions of each chapter, it helped me as a writer, kind of figure out structure of the novel.
From a process point of view, because I'm also a writer, and I suspect that many of you who have tuned in also are interested in the craft. Did you create these summaries on the top of each chapter document, or did you have one document that had summaries of each?
I had one separate document
Okay.
that is simply called synopsis. And so it's in fact, I printed it out before we started, and Frankenstein synopsis.
Oh,
And
that's so great.
and I highlighted on the computer in yellow the names of the characters in order to keep track. Because again, when I'm writing short stories, I don't have to, you don't need to really do that. And so moving towards the larger manuscript, I needed to keep track of characters, and I I have to be economical with my time. I don't suffer from writer's block, because I'm like a starved man, because I by my day job is so fulfilling and very full as a government lawyer, as a very working for an office that is very busy. Any free time I have to be very economical in how I use it, and one of the other things that has trained me as a writer has been my life as a lawyer, because as a lawyer, you need to work under deadline. You need to, you have to edit, you have to make certain you're telling a compelling story in your briefs. So all those type of things that I do as a lawyer are the same kind of skills that I need as a creative writer.
I love this idea of creating summaries of your chapters, especially for those of us who spend more than 50 days on a novel. I know when I spend a couple of years on a book, it's so easy to get tangled in the timeline when, if you have a couple weeks off or 2 months off, or you step aside before a big rewrite, and it's so easy to plant time markers that actually mess up the whole continuum of your project. So I'm going to take note of this, Daniel. I appreciate it.
I just came up with it on my own. I basically, there are people who say you have to write every single day. I don't, I do write every day, but it's usually my law practice, right? So I tend to not follow advice as like the only way to do something. Every writer has to find what works for them. I know there's some writers who have, a big bulletin board, and they have cards, and they move things around. That's wonderful. And if that's how, their brains work, all our brains work differently. And actually, like my main character, the man in the novel, his brain works differently from the other characters. And basically, my hope is that when people see that in the novel, that they see that the good people in the novel are respecting each other's differences in how we approach things. And in fact, his love affair that's blooming with Faustina is appreciating that he is different, and she is very different from him. She operates on a very different kind of path, a very lawyer-like kind of way of proceeding.
I definitely read their relationship as being a parallel to neurodivergence and dating someone who is neurodivergent, because Faustina sees in the man these traits of honesty and kindness that perhaps she hasn't seen in other people she's dated, at least not quite upfront the way the man always is with everything. I love that. I have to say that you were on NPR for this book, and I started my press in 2012, and I've tried to get on NPR with one of my authors before, and we've never made it until this time. You've gotten so much buzz and excitement around Chicano Frankenstein, or rather we have, because I've helped pitch as well. But I'm curious because many of your books also deal with immigration, displacement, racism, belonging. Is this your most political, and is that why you think it's getting picked up, or do you think it's the Shelley angle?
Well, it's interesting. I have written some very, very political pieces, and certainly my essays, like for the New York Times or Los Angeles Times and other places, are very, very political. It may just be that Frankenstein is such a hook. Most people, even if they haven't read the novel, they know about Frankenstein. They probably have seen one version or another, and as we know, there's like Lisa Frankenstein, a new movie. Guillermo del Toro right now is working on his version, his new movie. I think he's in Toronto filming right now. His Frankenstein. That may be the hook, and if that's the hook to get people to read the book and then hopefully appreciate it, my own take, that's fine. I think political satire also may have been a hook because, frankly, we are in such fraught times politically, and immigrants and people who look like immigrants for the last several years, have had a particularly difficult time with the political rhetoric. That rhetoric has always been around, from the beginning of this country. That's not anything new. But there's something that's been particularly heightened in the last few years with folks who are pushing the replacement theory, that they are somehow going to be replaced by immigrants or people who look like immigrants. The political rhetoric in recent years has gotten even more vicious than I can remember. And I grew up during Watergate. I grew up, I was around during the Vietnam War. So, I've seen political rhetoric, but this has gotten particularly ruthless, I think.
I hope everybody can see this, but we have these transcripts in the book, and we have press releases, and it's a way to get the political landscape of the setting of the novel on the page in a way that isn't filtered through the man or Faustina, but is its own recording of how the world works. It's very parallel to what we're seeing today, like you were just saying. Could you talk a little bit about your decision to give the politicians their own voice on the page and how that changes your novel?
Well, I had been watching a lot of the talking heads on cable, and so I thought for those particular transcripts of election night, for example, with Steve Kornacki at the big wall, and Joy Reid, and Ari Melber, they're doing their show, or Anderson Cooper interviewing the president of the United States, and their voices had already been very much in my mind because I had been watching a lot of political coverage, and so I wanted to kind of capture that element. And then there are other things. I have transcripts of a commercial, for example, from the president of the United States, where she's using tropes to gin up this fear of invasion of these un-American other people, as she calls them, Frankensteins, and as she's corrected by one of her comms people that she really means Frankenstein's monsters. And there's a little scene where she's going back and forth with one of her comms people, and she frankly, just gets fed up with that person. I won't tell you or everybody what the final outcome of that conversation is, but it's it's a little nod to the common mistake that people make, that Frankenstein is in fact the monster, when Frankenstein is actually the doctor who created the monster.
Well, in talking about national politics, I want to shift over a little bit into the regional side of your book. Chicano Frankenstein is, I like to think of it as a love letter to Pasadena. All the businesses, landmarks, and bookstores give us a sense of the community, and they also give the fantastical aspects of your novel deep grounding in reality. I love it so much as somebody who really appreciates the use of community in fiction, especially. So I'm curious about how you decided to set the novel in Pasadena, and if you could tell everyone a little bit about your family history, because you have deep roots there as well.
Right. Well, I have deep roots in Los Angeles, not deep roots in Pasadena, which is Pasadena, as folks don't know, is a city within the county of Los Angeles. LA County is huge, and there are multiple cities within the county, including the city of Los Angeles. I was born and raised in the city of Los Angeles. I've been writing fiction now for 25 years, and I always when I write a story that takes place in the United States, almost always it's placed within those parts of LA where I've lived. So I've lived in LA City, lived in San Fernando Valley, which is another part of the city of LA and the county of LA. Currently live in Pasadena. And for me as a writer, not only does it make the action very real, but it also helps me kind of tell a story about a community. So in this novel, it takes place in Pasadena, and I describe certain streets. I describe one of my favorite bookstores, Vroman's bookstore. There's actually a scene that takes place in Vroman's where Faustina is looking for a self-help book on dating a reanimated person, there's museum, there's gardens, different areas that I set scenes in. I think it's important to tell community stories, and one of the things that I do, for example, there is a scene that takes place up in the Ferry Building in San Francisco at a restaurant, and that particular chapter goes into a whole history of the Ferry Building, the architect, and when it was created and how it developed eventually from an actual ferry building to a place of commerce with restaurants and bookstores and things like that. And that, for me at least, that kind of points to the things that the reanimated man, is missing. History. His history has been removed. And in some ways that also mirrors the life of an immigrant. My grandparents left Mexico to go to the United States. They left behind their families to find a place of safety and to start new lives. And for many immigrants, I can't imagine a tougher journey to leave behind my home, to basically escape and start fresh. So the whole concept of history is something that kind of runs through, I think, the novel.
Speaking of family and the man not having any, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about Faustina's parents. You and I have talked, especially in recent months, about caretaking for aging parents. And there's something to me about Faustina's parents appearing on the page that really help round out her character, but they also feel in direct contrast to the man who does not have that sense of history.
Right. So one of the benefits to being an older writer, and I'm 65, so I've lived a few decades. I'm able to draw upon experience to create characters that are at different stages of their lives, from the very young to older folks, like myself. Um, and so I wanted, one of the things I wanted to do with Faustina's parents, and it's her mother, Veronica, and her stepdad, Saul. And I wanted to give that element to her history that would demonstrate to the man the beauty of and complications at times of the parent-child relationship, even as the child is a full-grown adult who's a lawyer, a partner in a firm. She still has her mom kind of nudging her, liking this man and wanting her to, like, go out with the guy and formalize a relationship because she wants her daughter to be happy. Um, and then Veronica and Saul, they both are folks who had been married happily, but their spouses had passed away, and they found each other in a meet cute situation that's described by Saul during one gathering. Um, they met at the cemetery when they each were visiting their respective beloveds, graves. And strange things happen in life. People meet under sometimes strange circumstances, and I have to imagine that their late spouses would have been smiling that their surviving spouse had found love again, because life is short, and if you can't cherish and find love, that's a difficult thing to go through life without finding that. So
I think in their dialogue with each other and with Faustina and the man, you can see their love of each other and how well suited they are. They're a very sweet couple, I think, and they feel very, very true to each other, true to themselves as whole characters, I guess.
yeah, thank you.
I'm wondering, we have a couple more minutes, and I'd love for you to talk about the man and his running scenes. These scenes where he grows out running at night. From a plot perspective, he's not learning new things about the world. He's not interacting with people usually. He's just being in his body and focusing on his breath. And when I first read the novel, I thought, well, this is, and I got to the first one or two, I thought, well, this is curious. This is a theme that's going throughout. I wonder where it's going. And as I got through the book, those scenes became so important to me as a reader. So I'm curious, why did you think to do things that way? Why did you give him these moments in his body? And how do they work in the novel?
I envisioned this novel when I was writing it almost as if it were a film, with scenes that would punctuate the film as we moved along. And I thought that a recurring scene of him alone, as you put it, with his own body, would be kind of a perfect way to kind of punctuate his growth as a person as the novel moves. Each time he's running, something different is happening in his mind, some new realization, something that demonstrates where he's at emotionally at that time. And I thought that it would capture what sometimes for him is a very lonely experience, going through this world without a history. In fact, Faustina at one point, when she's talking with her friend about, should she be with someone who has no history? She asks, how could you have a future without a past? And at one point in the novel, he expresses frustration about where he's at, and he tells Faustina, without his history, he feels like half a man. he's not quite there. So those scenes sort of um, I think punctuate that in a nice way, and I think they're very visual. And for me, they were good markers for me as a writer in terms of where my main character was going to, metaphorically and actually, physically.
I love that it works both ways for sure. Would you humor me and maybe read one of them? I'm thinking chapter 3 is one paragraph.
Chapter 3, let's
And then
see.
we'll get to questions in a moment. But I would love to
Okay.
hear that experience for the man on the page and have you share that with our audience today.
Sure. Chapter 3. The man closed his apartment door and entered the cool morning. He stretched his legs and twirled his arms in 3 clockwise circles. The man took a deep breath, put on his hoodie, and then started on his run. He turned left on Hurlbut Street toward Pasadena Avenue, and then turned left again. The man let his legs stretch out in long strides as his muscles slowly warmed up. Running cleared his mind, made him feel whole. Today, his arms and legs moved as they should, as part of one machine that was created to function without a hitch, in perfect rhythm. This was not always the case, but this time the man felt the kind of balance that calmed a desperate small voice in his head. His breathing grew heavy as his legs moved faster and faster in the cool morning. The man's mind was free and clear as he ran and ran and ran.
Just beautiful. Thank you so much. Also, a great example of why, first and foremost, I see your novel as literary fiction. That storytelling sound you have. Before we open it up to questions in a moment, what are you working on now?
Oh, so well, I have a short story coming out, a short story collection coming out called My Chicano Heart, New and Collected Stories of Love and Other Transgressions, published by University of Nevada Press. That comes out August 6th. And I started a new novel, a new horror novel. And I don't want to give the title of it. But no. I'm not going to give the title of it, but it will address. Of course, there will be some political elements. It's just the nature of my writing, but it's going to address the issue of addiction. And so that's going to be a running theme throughout the novel. I've written the first chapter, and I'm kind of mapping out how it's going to move on the page. So I think I like the start of it. It's going to be very different. It's going to be in the first person primarily. So it's going to be a different kind of novel, but I guess I'm a horror novelist now.
I mean, that's what the media says. I submitted your novel a lot of places, and a lot of reviewers called it horror. So I guess,
Yeah.
But you're fabulous at whatever genre you want to call it. This book is phenomenal, and I'm so honored to be your publisher.
Thank you. Well, you have given loving, tender care to this novel and to all the books you publish. You have a wonderful array of different kinds of books that you've published, and Forest Avenue Press, I think, is a jewel of publishing, and Portland is very proud of you and the press, and for every good reason, I think. There is a question. I see a question. Lori asked a question. Do you want to read that?
Sure. What was the process for creating the audiobook version? How hands-on were you in the interpretation?
So Tom Rivera is the actor who reads the novel. Blackstone Publishing published the audio. I actually did have some say, which was lovely. They gave me samples of 4 different actors reading, and they all were amazing. And it was very difficult to make a choice, but I finally went with Tom. And then Tom reached out to me, and we had a nice chat, and we went through his questions about the novel, about accents, about because some of my characters are born in the United States, some were born in Mexico. I have a Jewish American character in Saul, so he wanted to talk about, what kind of voice does he have, and my wife is Jewish, and so I have, a connection with Jewish families, and so we talked about those type of things, and Tom asked such wonderful, smart questions. My mom has listened to the entire audiobook, and she absolutely loved it. And I've been so impressed. As I'm almost done. I've been so busy, but I'm about halfway through, and it really is a remarkable thing to have my words read by a professional actor. If you ever have that chance as a writer, it is really an amazing process and experience.
Many people ask when I'm publishing a book if the author is going to be the narrator, and generally for fiction, the audiobook producers prefer having a trained actor for that very reason. They know how to create characters, and I'm excited about yours very much. And your book is also available in a Spanish language edition. We should shout that out as long as we're talking about versions.
Sure, it will be published this summer by Planeta, which is, I think, the largest Spanish language publisher in the world. And it's being translated right now. I don't have the facility to translate something as complex as this. So it's being translated by their professional translator, and not AI. And and I have looked at their artwork for their cover. It's going to be a different cover, of course, from yours. And that's the other thing. In working on the cover with you, and the artist Gigi Little, who is just a remarkable talent, was truly an experience. Gigi came up with 10 different, I think 10 different mock-ups and versions of the cover, based on conversations we had on some of the ideas I kind of threw out. And this cover just, it hit me between the eyes. It was so beautiful and iconic and very, very perfect, I think.
I agree. I love it too. I have another question for you from the audience when you're ready. What do you hope people get from reading your novel?
Well, first and foremost, I want people to be entertained. I mean, if I write a book that's boring, but that has a really important message, that's sort of a waste of time, because the poor reader might not even finish the book. So number one, I hope I'm telling a good story. On top of it, the icing on the cake would be if people take from it that, we're all basically the same. We all want to love, we all want to live, we all want to work, we all want to have a life that's fulfilling. And that's, a group of people that might feel like, they're too different from us. In the end, they're not really that different from us. And if that's the general overarching message a reader may take from this, I think that's a plus.
Excellent. Something that's neat about this novel is how introspective and thoughtful and careful the man is compared to so many heroes and heroines and protagonists of other books. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that?
In terms of how he thinks, and
well, yeah, in terms of how he thinks, and I'm curious because so often protagonists are charged with big actions because big actions equal plot and plot equals velocity for the reader. But somehow you've created a book with this really amazingly page-turning plot. It's also very tautly, carefully written. And also the man has a lot of thinking time in those running scenes.
So, in terms of, great literary journeys. I think the greatest journey that any protagonist can take is a journey of self-awareness and self-understanding. And since he is a clean slate, because he's been reanimated, his journey to find out, who he really is as a person, I think is just automatically a very dramatic kind of journey. Because I think, all of us are on that journey. We may forget we're on it because we get so busy and we're tired or whatever. But that's probably the greatest journey that any of us, journey of self-understanding and self-awareness.
Really well said. We have one more question from the audience. What was the most challenging aspect of writing this novel? That's a great one too.
The most challenging was that I just felt this urgency to finish it, to write it, to get it done, because of the political rhetoric that was occurring. I felt like I needed to get it into a publisher's hands fast, and I needed it to be out in the world. And with your help, we were able to move fairly fast, I think. And I think that was the biggest challenge. The actual writing of it, it was incredibly fun. Writing for me is just a joyful act. Yes, it's work, but it is the most joyous work I could ever want to do. I equate it to probably people who are dancers. To be a magnificent dancer, it takes a huge amount of work. But in the dance itself, I imagine there's so much joy and fulfillment in moving just in a way that hits the mark. So
that's a beautiful metaphor. I feel that way when I'm writing, but also when I'm publishing a work I believe in, which is what I do. I publish works I believe in. But there's even that sense of choreography and that delight when I'm doing layout and my hands are gliding across the keyboard and one of my authors has a paragraph that lands perfectly at the bottom of the page and I think, yes, it's just this sense of being in flow and being in the creative process. You and I think it was about 12 months from when you submitted through acceptance and publishing, and that's really fast for publishing, and for sure for me, I usually like an 18-month turnaround. But
yeah, we even adjusted the time because we wanted it to be published well before this next presidential election, and sure enough, we're dealing with the same anti-immigrant, rhetoric, and it's revved up even stronger.
Yeah, the hatred.
Yeah, and one of the things, one more note on a personal note, I'm very blessed to have a very loving family. My wife and son, my mom, and my late father, and my siblings. And I think being able to write about relationships and characters and families, all that comes from my experience and coming from a place that is filled with, love and yes, struggles. There's always struggles, but a community that is filled with, people who care about each other, and I think that's something that's I hope comes through in the book itself.
I think it comes through in all your work, wouldn't you say? That seems to be a motivating force of your career as a writer.
Yes, I think that's very true. Yes.
Which is a well-rounded career as well. When I first met you at the Tucson Festival of Books, I believe you were there with a poetry collection.
Yes, that's right. Crossing the border. That's right. I was there, and a lot of those poems are based on family.
Well, thank you so much. Unless we have any more questions, Lori.
No, but thank you both so much for your time and for being here with us. It was a pleasure learning more about your book, Daniel. And for those of you tuning in from home, you can order a copy of Chicano Frankenstein First from Busboys and Poets Books, but you can also go to bookshop.org and support your favorite local indie bookstore. We don't care where you get it from. You can get it from your local public library, from your local indie. Don't do it from Amazon. Do not do it. But you guys have got to get a copy of Chicano Frankenstein into your hands. So again, you can go online to bookshop.org, or if you're here in the DMV, you can actually order online for delivery or for pickup, dinner, lunch, breakfast, whatever you want to do for you and the family. And you can actually pick up a copy of Chicano Frankenstein that way. So if you're at home and you're like, I don't want to leave my house, I just need some food for me and the kids, order yourself that shrimp chicken chorizo pasta, get the kids some buttered noodles and chicken tenders, maybe a bottle of wine for yourself, and definitely a copy of Chicano Frankenstein. All right. Thank you both so much. And thank you to everyone at home. Have a good rest of your evenings, and peace and love from all of us here at Busboys and Poets. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.